Before anything else, thank you all for coming, and especially also to thank our speakers of this morning for just phenomenal presentation. Before I introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker, I just would like to make one announcement that please, all of you, look at the joint statement that is in your folder, in which we articulate or try to articulate what are the reasons for us coming together and what might be our next actions and what we are going to advocate for. And I'd just like, if you could sign that, bring that back to your organizations, have your organization sign it as well, and come out in support. So far, the joint statement already has produced extraordinary results. Number one, Assembly Member William Scarborough, since the joint statement is asking for the establishment of a New York State Commission on Child Abuse and Violence Against Children, Assemblyman Scarborough has already agreed that he will establish and introduce such legislation. So one of the goals is already. The next one, another one was to really try to see whether we can push towards another National Commission on Children. As I said this morning, the last report came in 1991. When you read it, very little actually has happened. So I think we really need an active National Commission. And in this connection, and then I will finish, is that there's an organization called Every Child Matters, and they together with major other national organizations, National Association of Child Protective Workers, of a whole series of alliances, have now formed a coalition, a national coalition, to end the death of children from child fatality due to child abuse. And we are working with them, and they are asking for a national commission on child fatalities. But at any rate, look over our joint statement. We're trying to work together with more and more organizations and see how we can actually translate all the wonderful ideas that we have, but also translate it into action in order to change the terrible realities that our children find themselves in. It is now my special pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Phelan Wyrick. Dr. Wyrick is the co-chair of the Attorney General Holder's Defending Childhood Initiative, which he announced in September 2010. And Dr. Wyrick will tell you about this initiative, because just, I think, on October 13th, the Attorney General announced the establishment of a Defending Childhood Initiative task force, and which will have 4 hearings, I believe, within the next year, national hearings. And so we're actually very proud. We seem to be a little bit ahead of the game about having our consultation. It's my pleasure, Dr. Wyrick, to introduce you, and you will tell us about the exciting initiative of the Attorney General.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Lenzer, and on behalf of Attorney General Eric Holder and the U.S. Department of Justice, I really want to thank all of the leadership of Brooklyn College to the University of New York for holding this event, and to all of you. It's a very distinguished collection of presenters and participants here today. It's truly an honor for me to be here. For some of you who don't know Eric Holder very well, I feel compelled to say a few things about him. He's, for someone like me, who I'm a career employee with the Department of Justice, I've been there since 1998. And Eric Holder is the kind of, he's my kind of Attorney General, I gotta be honest with you, because he came all through the ranks. He served as a line prosecutor. He served as U.S. Attorney for the District for Washington, D.C. And that particular U.S. Attorney District is a little different than every other federal U.S. Attorney District in the sense that because of D.C.'s particular status as a federal city, that U.S. Attorney's Office handles essentially both felony, federal cases, but also what we would consider misdemeanors or things that would be handled more at the city level for most other districts. He served as the Deputy Attorney General under the Clinton administration, and he served as a judge, and he's come back and served as the Attorney General under the Obama administration. And when he served as the Deputy Attorney General, he began to organize intergovernmental or an interagency response on the federal level, really drawing together experts from around the field to address this particular problem. Now, you may ask, why was he focusing on this? Why is this such a high priority to him? And his own words really spelled it out for me so clearly one day when he was talking about it with our team. He said, as a prosecutor and as a judge, I've been responsible for sending an ocean of young black men to prison. He says, and I know that for the vast, vast majority of those men, that exposure and direct victimization of violence early in their childhood is a key factor. And that's a key reason why he was facing them in the courtroom. He sees this, as I think we all do, as such a root issue. And as we already heard today, as people have talked about prison overcrowding. We talked about the issues of reentry that we're facing in every state in this country, budgetary crisis, forcing revisiting of the way that we, our incarceration policies and our sentencing policies. All of this sends us back to these root issues. For the Attorney General, this is a very personal cause. And when he returned in 2009, it didn't take long before he brought together an internal group of us in the department and made it very clear that he wanted us as a department to look very carefully at what we were doing and what we could do to advance policy and practice across this country on this issue. Now, I want to be clear, the first efforts that he was involved in during the Clinton administration really helped us organize our understanding of this issue. At that time, we were able to draw together information that really helped us understand the impact and the effects of this early exposure. And from that work, we were able to launch some programs. Some of you may be familiar with the Safe Start program that's been going on ever since. There's a Safe Start Center website that that provides resources to practitioners and policymakers in terms of how to respond to this issue. We've worked on this, and we've continued to work on it in the years in between, but it had become one among many programs, a low priority for the department as a whole. When General Holder came back, he made it clear that this was going to be a high priority for us and we were going to reinvigorate our efforts. So that's where Defending Childhood has its birth, and we started by looking at the things we're already doing and how we could start coordinating and better implementing those. I should tell you a little bit about myself as well, because although I've worked on a variety of topics in justice, this was one of the topics I addressed early on in my career and has continued to be a theme. Before coming to the department in 1998, I worked in a police department in Orange County, California. It's a city of Westminster. And in the mid-90s, there was police departments across the country were revisiting their approach to domestic violence. Frankly, high-profile case, the O.J. Simpson trial, brought this to the attention of departments across the land, and people began asking the question, how are we really addressing this issue? And changes began to take place. That was happening in our police department, and we were putting together approaches that we thought were pretty innovative, and were improving our response to the issue. We co-located domestic violence detectives with victim service providers and victim advocates, and we co-located them also with district attorneys who were dedicated to the issue of domestic violence. We thought we were making some good progress on the issue, but as we did this work, we continued to have this sort of unsettled feeling, uneasy feeling, because time and again law enforcement would go into those situations. What law enforcement across the country will tell you are some of the most difficult circumstances and incidents for them to respond to are these domestic violence cases. They respond to these incidents. We worked on how we could get better evidence on the scene so that we could carry it forward into court. We worked on training people about what to look for, etc., having that victim response. But again and again, we'd see that unless the children who were present were direct victims of violence themselves, in which case we could call Child Protective Services and have the discussion we just talked about and move into the foster care question. Their tool was largely, do you draw the child out of the home? That's a pretty drastic measure, and we knew it then. And so, unless you saw that direct violence against the child, we had no response. We had no options. And the police themselves would leave those scenes, the officers themselves would leave those scenes with an uneasy feeling. Because it doesn't take, although we have all the research we do, it doesn't take all the research to know what witnessing that violence at an early age leads to. Seasoned police officers have seen this again and again. That's why the same communities that had very serious violence in most cities 20 years ago are the same communities that have very serious violence now. It's staying in the same buildings, the same communities, the same dynamics, and the same families year after year. So we put together a very simple program. And the reason I want to talk about this is because, for two reasons. One, I looked at the schedule of speakers, and I noticed I didn't see someone from law enforcement. So I wanted to represent that perspective, because one of the things in the Department of Justice, we really see is that law enforcement can play such an important role here. They're first responders in so many situations where you're talking about violence in the home or violence in the community. They're first responders. They're on the spot. They're already collecting information. They have a role and authority that allows them to respond to that aspect. But it's not in place in most cities, in most localities. So here's what we did. It was very simple. We basically folded into our training, folded into our leadership directions and our accountability structures that when responding to a domestic violence situation or any other situation in which children witnessed violence, not just direct victims, but we would collect that information about those children. Make sure we got their names, what school are they going to, and that's about all we need to put onto the form. And then we made sure we put it into place an internal referral mechanism that would send that information to a particular officer who would field it, and then he had a multidisciplinary team from across the community that he would meet with twice a week. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that this is the optimal response. There are more sophisticated responses involving law enforcement that involve cross-training, bringing highly trained professionals in trauma to having them on the scene at the response. There's more sophisticated things out there. But the reason I bring this up is because even this simple set of steps that we were taking, we didn't build new programs around this. All we did in those multidisciplinary teams was start caseworking it a little bit. What do we know about Johnny? What do we know about this family? And we've got a school counselor there, and we've got the Boys and Girls Clubs there, and we've got probation, and we've got social services and child protective services around. And we just start thinking, what formal or informal work can we do? And so that's the kind of thinking that we believe can go on in communities around the country. And law enforcement is a key tool for all of that. So with regards to making this happen, we started talking and working with police departments around the country as well. Last summer I was speaking with Chief Michael McGrath. He's from the police department in Cleveland, Ohio. And he talked about work that they were doing. It was similar. He had a mechanism for referring these cases to the proper folks who would be able to respond and provide the kind of services quickly after those traumatic events with young people and their families. And one of the things that he said that was so interesting to me is that he said, among all the positive outcomes, he saw job satisfaction among his police officers go up. And this is one of the things I saw in law enforcement too. And I wasn't one of those kids who grew up in a police family or anything. Before I ever started at a police department, I really asked myself, I'm scared of police. Why would I do this? But what you find when you go into police departments around the country is that the vast majority of those individuals who join that line of work, they do it because they're trying to help people. And they're trying to make communities safer. And they're trying to do the right thing. So it improves their job satisfaction and their ability to do their work when they know they can hand this off and somebody's able to do the right kind of thing with those young people and get in there and provide the supports that will help to break down that cycle that we see that goes from generation to generation. That is frustrating to law enforcement. So what did we do? Defending childhood. First thing we did was look inside. We looked at all of our components. We've got the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, you may know of, the Office on Victims of Crime, the Office on Violence Against Women. We've got National Institute of Justice that does research. We've got Bureau of Justice Statistics. We've got all these components, the Community-Oriented Policing Service Program. These are all components that provide direct support out to communities. They provide support for research, for training, and they're all under our roof. We didn't get any new appropriations. We did ask. We put it into the President's budget request to Congress for fiscal year 2011, but Congress hasn't granted any of our requests for new program dollars for this initiative. Instead, we went to all of our existing program dollars and drew together everything we can. It's been about $35 million over 2 years. And what we've tried to do is bring our own team together so that we could be a little more concerted and a little more coordinated in our effort. Because we need to model what we're telling localities to do. And that's exactly what we started talking to localities about. We set our parameters first. First of all, as we've already discussed in this room, we're talking about direct exposure to violence, we're talking about witnessing violence. Violence in the home, violence in the community, sexual violence. Now for those of us who work these issues all the time, these all get separated out. These usually get all broken out. Your community violence people is one whole set, your domestic violence people is another whole set, your sexual violence people another whole set, and they're not handled, by the same professionals. So we're trying to draw those together, 0 to 17, through 17. Again, you got your early childhood people who work over here, you got your adolescent people who work over there. That's how it typically breaks out. We need to break those barriers down because this issue crosses all of them. So we set 3 goals. Our overall goal is really to influence policy and practice at all the levels, the local level, the state level, federal level, tribal level. Okay? I want to underscore it. Indian tribes is a huge issue with children exposed to violence. So we set 3 goals, broad goals for the initiative. Prevent children exposure to violence as victims and witnesses. Reduce the negative effects of experiencing violence by children. And develop knowledge about and increase awareness of this issue. And when we launched it, we were able to launch it on the heels of the release of the findings from the National Survey on Children Exposed to Violence that Dr. Finkelhor discussed. I want to underscore, that was a project that we funded, but we also funded with the CDC. We were trying to work in partnership with Health and Human Services, Department of Education, and the work that they're doing as well. So I won't go back through the findings of that study. We've heard eloquent statements about the scope of this problem, the impact of this issue. But we know that the consequences of the problem are significant and they're widespread. We know that as victims or witnesses, it's associated with long-term physical, psychological, and emotional harm. And it's also brings about a higher risk of engaging in criminal behavior and also becoming repeat victims of violence. So we know we can do things about this though, because if we're able to carry out early identification and put early interventions into place, we can have a huge positive impact. So I spent a lot of my career working on gang prevention. And one of the things you see as you go to one city after another and go to the areas where the gang activity is worse, is that there's a huge amount of resilience among young people, even in these worst areas, that most of the kids aren't joining the gang. Most of the kids aren't involved in violence. So what is it about the ones who are? And we've seen from the research this multiple victimization issue, this poly-victimization issue is such a key matter. So if you're not safe at home, if you're not safe in school, if you're not safe in community, these are the kind of issues, that's when this issue becomes most problematic. So we did a couple things on the initiative. I'll talk about our demonstration project. One of the things we try to do is demonstrate communities in action. We wanted to put communities into direct action in addressing this issue. And someone mentioned earlier, you'd have communities that had a pretty good program for, 7 to 12-year-olds, or they'd have a good response for 0 to 5, etc. Or they'd have a good community-based violence response, but not something on the other side. So we tried to get a set of cities that would really dedicate themselves to putting together a comprehensive response across these issues, assessing their challenges, and building that strategic response. So last year we funded 8 localities to do that, gave them each about $160,000 to build their partnership, do their assessment work, and build their strategy. And then they came back to us this year, and we made awards to support the implementation of these comprehensive plans. Now, it's not just about helping those, in this case, 6 localities that we're funding. It's about learning from what they're doing. Because I'll list them to you. Boston is one of our cities. City of Grand Forks in North Dakota. Cuyahoga County, which includes Cleveland, Ohio. Shelby County, which includes Memphis, Tennessee. And 2 Indian tribes, Rosebud Sioux Tribe and the Chippewa Cree Tribe in Montana, are involved in this initiative. We're evaluating it, we're providing training and technical assistance. This is what we have a strategy that I call deep and wide. This is the deep side. We're going to go deep into these localities, we're going to evaluate what they do, we're going to study their thing, and the idea is to share lessons with localities all across the country. Because frankly, it's about locals solving problems and acting on these issues that's going to inform us most about how do we really make a difference on the ground. We're going to provide enough framework, we're going to provide some support to them, but it's really about the solutions they generate. The wide side of our strategy is summed up in a couple of ways. We're providing training, we're looking to law enforcement, we're doing a variety of other grants. I mentioned Safe Start. Safe Start is continuing. A number of you may be familiar with the Children Exposed to Violence grants out of the Office for Violence Against Women that went out this year. But the other one I'll talk about was mentioned briefly, the Attorney General's Task Force on Children Exposed to Violence. The idea here is to pull together a group of 14 leading experts from diverse fields to staff this task force over the next year. They're going to hold multiple hearings around the country. The idea is to, from this work, generate a set of policy recommendations that can have applications at the local, state, and federal level. This is a federal advisory committee full with all the responsibilities that entails. They'll be advising directly to the Attorney General. We think, and we've seen from past examples, that these task forces and the reports that they create can be very influential. The influence of those reports will rest not just on the task force members, not just on the Department of Justice, but with all the folks who are interested in this issue out in the field. A number of you are already signed up to be witnesses at our first hearing that's happening in Baltimore and later this month. We're going to have 3 more hearings in Miami, Detroit, and Albuquerque. We'll be continuing to reach out to people to participate in those hearings, and we're having 3 listening sessions also. These listening sessions are slightly different. It's more at the ground level, talking with community members, talking with parents and service providers to really get the grounded response on this. We're very excited about what we're going to get out of this task force, but it's just one piece of our Defending Childhood initiative. And what we're most excited about is the energy that we see in this room, and as we talk about this and work this issue across the country, for folks who really understand that this is the key to addressing so many of the other issues that we have, not just in criminal justice or juvenile justice, but as we've heard throughout the day, in mental health issues, physical health issues, educational issues, jobs issues. So thank you very much. I really appreciate being here, and good luck to all of you in your work today. Thank you.